I haven't been in touch with him for a long time, so I've heard that he knows.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. It's you know.
I think it's one of those crazy coincidences in life that just totally blow you away.
He used to
and
come to
totally
our practices when
That's
he was
what I was gonna say. Like
4
my
years
son,
old.
Yeah,
you
he
know,
goes around with cans.
run
on.
around, look at everything, and go, oh wow,
Yeah.
wow.
That's, That is what I'm looking for. Nothing
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, my dad was in a ton of bands back then, and some of them and this is another weird thing because I didn't actually start playing drums seriously until like 3 years ago with these guys. Like I'm a bass player. In all the rest of my bands, I've always played bass. But back in the early 70s when my father was in these bands, he actually bought a little toy drum kit for me. And I would play like, I couldn't hit hard enough to make it, distracting to him and the musicians when they were practicing. But for me it was great because I'd sit there and I'd just play along with
play
them.
along with their rehearsals?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's cool.
And,
Never
of course I
mentioned that
couldn't
before.
play, I was just hitting shit. But
Yeah, but hitting stuff when you're that, when you're a little kid,
Oh,
that's
it was
so
great.
awesome.
Yeah, and I felt like, I was like 2 or 3 years old. I felt like I was
I'm
part
in
of
the band, man.
Yeah. And it's funny because I didn't, you think I would have picked up drums after that.
Right.
On our first
exactly.
album, we went into a friend of mine's that I've known since I was 20 or something. And he was in the band with Kelly's dad, Gary.
Oh yeah, another band.
For a long time. Hadn't heard about Gary or anything else. We come walking in and I go, yeah, this is our drummer, Kelly Halliburton. He goes, Halliburton? Are you related to Gary? Yeah. And he had played with Gary for like 4 or 5 years in a band called the Moondogs. And that was the first time that he had ever met Kelly, and he recorded our first album in Piersteros. So it was kind of a weird thing.
It was a weird thing.
Like,
Actually, he did make me before.
Did he?
I recorded a record in his studio in about 1991. A band called Deprived that was the band 3/4 of Defiance members before we formed Defiance.
Right.
And I'm sure John totally forgot about that
Oh,
because
probably.
it
That
was
was so long
almost
ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
But so we were hanging out. I had no clue that this guy had any connection to my dad.
Right.
And I was just hanging out there, and John had all these photos, and John's the engineer, the guy who owns the studio. And he had all these photos of his old bands on the walls. And I was looking around, I was looking at them, and I was like,
Wait a minute.
the Moondogs. My dad was in a band called the Moondogs. And I looked, and, there's this young guy who was my dad in the photo,
Oh,
from
cool.
like, must have been like 72
Yeah,
or 73.
yeah, those
something.
guys were playing around way
He
back
played
then.
keyboards, played piano.
Yeah.
And I asked him, and it blew him away.
Yeah.
I was like,
That's really weird.
was there a guy named Gary in this
band?
photo?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, that's crazy.
my dad.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. Bunch of coincidences.
Yeah.